Good morning. We want to welcome you all to Stratford Park Bible Chapel. Please stand. Let's worship together this morning for the cause.
Nothing
Please be seated. I hear the Savior say, thy strength indeed is small. Child of weakness, watch and pray. Find in me thine all in all. Jesus paid it all to him I owe. Sin had left a crimson stain, he washed it white as snow. Lord, now indeed I find thy power and thine alone can change the leper's spots and melt the heart of stone. Jesus paid it all to him I owe. Sin had left a crimson stain, he washed it white as snow. For nothing good have I, whereby thy grace to claim. I'll wash my garments white in the blood of Calvary's Lamb. Jesus paid it all to him I owe. Sin had left a crimson stain, he washed it white as snow. And when before the throne I stand in him complete, Jesus died my soul to save. My
Good morning, Stratford Park. I've got a couple announcements I want to highlight. The first is on Wednesdays in July, there's been community-wide prayer meetings, and you're invited to attend that this Wednesday. It's at Beardsley Park in Champaign. That's a number of churches that come together and pray for our community. The other announcement I had was Family Fun Night is a week from Friday. So if you like to have fun and you have a family of any kind, come to that. Or if you were born into a family, you can still come. So that will be fun, as I just said. And there will be a carpet ball tournament, so stay tuned. And finally, the other announcement I had is we do have a couple brown bags for our missionaries, both today and next week. So if you'd like to check out some of the mission activities that our missionaries are involved in, please come to those. And the missionaries we have with us this Sunday are Josh and Lisa Inman, and they're going to come up right now. And Nathan Talbert is going to, I don't know if he's going to interview them or, yeah, we'll find out. But
you don't really need me up here, but I'll start. So we have Josh and Lisa Inman with us. We're really excited about this, and we'll talk a little bit more about their ministry. I'm really excited about the ministry they do in Thailand and Southeast Asia, but you guys can describe it better than I can, so I'll stop talking soon. But we're really glad you're here to visit us. They've been supported missionaries of the chapel for 10 years now? Yeah? No? 8? Okay. So they're here visiting in town. Like Jeremy said, we have a brown bag after this, where this is a really good chance for you to get to know them better. So we're going to have an introduction here, hear a little bit about their ministry. But I really encourage you, the chapel really loves to get behind our missionaries, both financially, but understanding what they do, talking with them. And this is the chance for you to get to know the Inmans better. So if you don't have plans after church, if you do, push them back a little bit later, grab something from McDonald's and come hear more about what they're doing. But I'll start asking you some questions. First, some of the folks here don't even know who you are. What's your connection with Stratford Park?
Lisa and I were both students at the University of Illinois. I came to U of I in 2001. Lisa came in 2002. And Stratford Park was my church home. I was a student here, and then for a year while I served as an intern with Campus Crusade for Christ. And the reason I gave kind of a vague answer to Nathan's question or answer about how long Stratford has supported me is that when I was an intern with Cru, Stratford Park gave me a gift that kind of helped launch me into ministry, a financial gift, and then a few years later, the church came on our team as a regular ministry partner. So, yeah.
Tell us about your ministry now.
Well, Lisa share.
Okay. Okay, I'll share. Going farther back, since we were with Cru for Josh, like 9 years, and me 8 years, I think we were with Cru. And then, but more recently, we were with an organization called Global Hope Network International. And not entirely unlike Cru, but quite different, the specifics of what we do. But similar heart behind the work. But Global Hope seeks to come alongside villages in the unreached parts of the world that are living in poverty, particularly rural areas, but not exclusively, trying to help enable them to become self-sustainable in water, food, income, wellness, and education, kind of working through a coaching and empowerment program. And we do that in Southeast Asia, in Thailand. Josh more than me, but he's the regional field leader over Thailand, Indonesia, Myanmar, and maybe other countries in the future, but that's where we're involved right now, working with villages in those areas. And then I also teach at Grace International School, which is a school primarily, it was created to serve missionary families in Thailand and beyond, as we have several dorms of students who their parents are serving in a really difficult part of the world, while their kids, like high school age kids, are going to our school. So it's a Christian school that seeks, that all of our teachers are volunteers. None of us get paid a salary, so yeah. So I think that's mostly it for that question. Do you have another question?
Yeah, I got lots of questions. Sorry, Mike, you wanted some time to preach? Yeah. So the past couple of years with COVID has been really weird for all of our missionaries. Some, being back here, back and forth. I know Thailand's a little more locked down than some countries. Can you tell us a little bit about what the 2 years have been like?
Sure, and a huge focus of how we work in communities is we have community meetings with people. And so you can imagine that during the time of COVID, when you weren't encouraged to gather together, that made some challenges for us. We shifted some to doing some Zoom meetings online. That was okay in some communities, and for other communities it didn't work. So it really slowed us down quite a bit. But we did find that communities that we had partnered with already that had like a committee formed to lead the work in their village forward, we saw them make progress, but it really slowed us down when we were trying to work in new areas, if that makes sense. For our family, it was also a big challenge. Our school was online for 9 months, from April of 2021 until the end of 2021. And, that meant that I was working at about 40% capacity because I was trying to help out with the kids. Lisa was teaching online, helping kids online with classes. So it really made a big difference as far as how we were able to work. Now, there were some opportunities as well. We work in community development. We also do relief, but we're primarily a development organization. But through COVID-19, we were able to reach out into some new communities where we didn't have the opportunity to be there before because they needed help. In northern Thailand, when a village had COVID-19 in it, the government basically shut off all access to it. And so if you lived in that community, even if you didn't have COVID, you couldn't go to work. And a lot of these villages, their job is either farming, or if they're working as a day laborer, they didn't have food or money to put food on the table. So we were able to help communities in that way.
Sorry, I can grab that one, I guess. Hold on, you keep this one.
Okay.
This will make it easier. Tell us what church, fellowship, do you have other believers you're with? What's that like for you?
Yeah, thankfully in Chiang Mai, Thailand, where we are, sometimes it's a good thing and sometimes it's a bad thing, but there is a large missionary community of like expats, not all missionaries, but quite a few expats live there. Some are just teaching English somewhere, and some are actually doing ministry. But so when we first moved back to Thailand, we were attending a Thai church, partially because the pastor of the Thai church has been our key person that has helped us to get connected in some of these villages in northern Thailand. One of the villages where Josh's team is working, he's from that village area. And it's extremely poor. It's one of the poorest areas in all of Thailand. And so we were attending that church partially for some Thai immersion and partially to foster that relationship. But more recently, we have been attending an international church quite a bit of the time, both because we have young kids who need to understand something at church because their Thai is not good, and neither is mine actually. Josh's is pretty good, but and then so I think when we get back, he's actually going to be sharing a message at the Thai church. So we're going to be kind of back and forth between Thai and international church, which is in English. So yeah.
And real quick, you mentioned your kids. How many do you have, and how old are they?
We have 3 kids. They're 11, 9, and 7, Haley, Colby, and Noah. I guess we should... Oh, there we go. They're up there.
And an elephant. Is that your elephant?
Lisa's an animal lover, so we've got 3 bunnies and a dog, but no elephants. Yet. But I just wanted to add a couple real quick things, if that's all right. We do community development work in these villages, but our goal is to see a church planted in that community as well. Our organization's registered as an NGO. We have a relationship with the United Nations, so we're not registered as a Christian missions organization, but that's a huge part of our goal. And in northern Thailand, the way that we're seeing that work go forward is we're partnering with people who are either church planting pastors themselves or wanting to share the gospel with the people in their community. And so we see our approach as really equipping them to use community development as a way to reach out to the communities that they work in and the neighboring villages as well. If you want to learn more about that, you can come to the Brown Bag, because I think we could monopolize all of your time here, but we should give the microphone back.
Before you do, one more question. What are a couple things that people can have in mind to be praying for you over the next few weeks? And then we'll go into more detail in the Brown Bag. But
Sure. Well, a week from Tuesday, we go back to Thailand because we need to get back in time for the next school year. So I think you can just be praying that it seems like things are continuing to relax in terms of restrictions in Thailand, and that's going to make our work easier. Just pray that that would continue. We keep hearing things like Thailand's opening 500 more field hospitals for people with COVID, which is a thing where they were like forcing everyone who tested positive to go to a field hospital, whether you had any symptoms or not. It was very stressful when we were there, and afraid of our children getting sequestered away to one of these field hospitals without us, which was happening to people. So just pray that things continue to relax rather than go the other way, because I think every time COVID spikes, they try to add more restrictions back in. But so that the work can continue. And then to Myanmar, one of the places where Josh oversees the work, we have national staff that are in country doing that work, is still going through a lot of political unrest. Well, they have been for many years, but it's been much worse in the past year, where traveling for our staff feels dangerous, and even being at home for a while, they were fearful for their lives every night. They would stay up all night because they were so fearful, and then sleep during the day. So you can just be praying for Myanmar that things would improve. It's going to take a miracle with what the government is like there, but nothing's impossible with God. So anything else? You can pray for my mom too. She's got stage 4 cancer, which has been really hard for us. I think being in Thailand and even thinking about going back to Thailand a week from now, I think we're just kind of nervous about. She's being treated, and the treatment is definitely helping, so we're hopeful she's going to have a lot more time. But I think that's been a stressor with being in Thailand, too.
We'll be praying for you. Well, thank you so much. We're glad you're here today. Again, I want to encourage everybody, if you want to learn more, I think there's more pictures to look at, too. Then come to the Brown Bag afterwards, pick up food. Thank you, guys. We really appreciate the work you're doing. We thank you for taking time out of your visit here in the States to come up here. So we appreciate it. Back to you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Nathan. Well, one of the ways we keep missionaries at front and center so you can be aware of them is we have a missionary of the month. And this month, it's Mike and Gwen McQueen, who you'll actually see him up here in about 5 minutes. So, yeah, that's how he looks on that picture. You'll see how he looks in person very shortly. But you'll see their prayer requests in the bulletin. Please keep them in prayer this month. And let's go to the Lord in prayer. Lord, I thank you so much that you were sent by the Father to come down to this earth, dwell among us, and give your life for us. And now you send us out to be your light, your hands and feet in this world. And I pray that this body here would be the light in Champaign and Urbana, and would be spreading your truth, would be spreading your love, would be spreading your grace to others. Lord, I lift those up who are full-time serving you. I think of the Inmans, God, and the prayer requests they brought to us this morning. I do pray for Lisa's mother, and I pray for that situation, and I just pray protection for their family, and that they would continue to do your work through the power of your Spirit. Lord, I pray for the same for all of our missionaries, God, that we support, both those that Stratford Park supports and others who are out in the mission field doing your work, that they would be depending on your Spirit and would be used by you to bring your gospel to the world. Lord, I pray for our body, God. I know there's many prayer requests that have gone out recently. Barbara Schrock and John Parentine and many others, God, who are under the weather, not doing well, and God, they need your healing power. They also need your presence. God, I pray that your presence would be with them. And Lord, I pray for our families, our young families that are raising their kids, and their kids are in school, the public school system or in the Christian school system or being homeschooled, I do pray that you would be with these parents as they are used by you to train their children in your gospel truth. And I pray for our kids that they would accept you as their Lord and Savior. Lord, I pray that as I started with, that our families here at Stratford Park would be the light in this world. Lord, I pray for the elderly in our body. I pray for singles in our body. I pray for those who are married, that you would be with all of us and be present in our lives, that your peace and joy and love would fill us. Lord God, I pray for Mike McQueen as he comes forward to give your word, that we would be attentive to what you have to say to us this morning. Thank you once again for your grace and your salvation. Pray this all in your name. Amen.
Good morning, everyone. Got lots of papers up here this morning. Probably won't use any of them. Anyway, this morning, if I was to title my sermon, I would title it "The Significance of the Insignificant." Let's try that again. The Significance of the Insignificant. We're doing a series, for those of you who don't know, on unlikely heroes in the Scriptures. It's the Elders series, and originally, when Daryl kicked this off 2 weeks ago, I heard his sermon. I was really pumped by it. I thought, man, he had such a great outline. I'm going to use that outline on this passage I'm using today because there's a significant amount of overlap. And then I worked the sermon over, and I go, could do this another way too. And then I did it again. And I go, could have done this another way too. So last night, I finally decided which way I was going to preach this sermon. So it kind of came together at the last minute. But it doesn't mean I haven't thought about it. This has been an important passage to me for years. I wrote a sermon on this in 1998, and it's been sitting in a file all that time. And the significance of the insignificant is something that we don't think about because it's insignificant, right? It's not important. But do you know that if there is, just in science, if there is a 0.5 degree Fahrenheit difference in temperature in the southeast Pacific Ocean, that it can affect the entire weather patterns of the United States for years. Sometimes it's called El Nino. 3 to 5 years it can take place. Half of a degree of temperature in the surface of the Pacific Ocean can create droughts in the west and blizzards in the east. Daryl is a farmer, I'm sure, follows El Nino more carefully than I do, but it's insignificant, right? Half a degree. You couldn't even tell the difference if you walked outside, and yet it makes a huge difference. I'm told that a 5% swing in emissions in cars can increase skin cancer in people all over the globe. Don't ask me why, I don't know how it works. It has something to do with the ozone, but little things make big differences. Politically, a middle-aged black woman back in the 1960s refused to get up and move to the back of a bus. And Rosa Parks' actions precipitated what became the modern civil rights movement. And very important, who would have thought that one insignificant person, that her name would have never been known if she'd not refused to give her seat up, but she didn't. Historically, we see all kinds of examples of insignificant things happening. I'm going to start with a story about a farmer in England in the 1880s. We'll call him Farmer Fleming. It was his last name. And he was just out in the field doing his job one day. Worked on the estate of a huge estate of a big lord who was involved in the government, a guy named Lord Randolph. And so he's out working, and here's this crying for help. And he looks over, and there's a pond off at the distance. There's a 10-year-old boy in the pond, and he's drowning. Well, he didn't think twice about it. He jumped off his horse or whatever he was doing, ran to the pond, jumped in, saved the little boy's life. Didn't think anything more about it. It was just, it's what he did. just an ordinary farmer. He could swim. He had a 10-year-old son himself. He thought of his son as he jumps in, and he did it. Well, later that night, Lord Randolph shows up at his door. Lord Randolph owns the big estates, right? And a huge thing. And he says, I want to reward you. That was my son that you rescued. And Farmer Fleming said, well, you know, I've got a 10-year-old son. I would have done it for him. I did it for your son. You don't have to give me anything. And Lord Randolph says, no, I really insist. I feel like I owe you something. And really, I guess he kind of did, right? So Farmer Fleming again refused, but then Lord Randolph said this. He says, why don't I do this? He said, I will educate your son. Because in the 1880s, farmers' kids didn't get educated. And so Lord Randolph finally persuaded Farmer Fleming to do that. And so he paid for the son's education. We're going to leave that there for now. We'll come back to it later. But here it was. You know, one guy did what he could do, and that was swim. Another guy did what he could do, and that was educate a kid. I mean, he was filthy rich. When he died, he had a multi-million-dollar estate, incredibly influential politically. But each person did something that really didn't cost either one of them anything, and probably didn't think a whole lot about it after the fact. And yet, it's an insignificant act that will have much more significant impact later. So this morning, we're going to look at Naaman's servants. If you, I'll put the passage from 2 Kings 5 up there. We're going to read that. Is it there? All right. Okay. It's a little long, but it's worth the read. It's a great story. Now Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great... Hang on. I'm reading an NIV, and that is undoubtedly in ESV. Let me do that in ESV. Okay, Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Assyria, was a great man with his master and high in favor, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was a mighty man of valor, but he was a leper. Now the Syrians, on one of their raids, had carried off a little girl from the land of Israel. She worked in the service of Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, would that my Lord were with the prophet who were in Samaria. He would cure him of his leprosy. So Naaman went and told his Lord. Thus and so spoke the girl from the land of Israel. And the king of Assyria said, go now, I will send a letter to the king of Israel. So he went, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, 10 changes of clothing. And he brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, when this letter reaches you, know that I have sent you my servant Naaman my servant, that you may cure him of his leprosy. And when the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, am I God to kill and make alive, that this man sends word to me to cure a man of leprosy? Only consider, see how this man is seeking a quarrel with me. But when Elisha, the man of God, heard the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent to the king saying, why have you torn your clothes? Let him come to me, that he may know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and stood at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to him saying, go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean. But Naaman was angry when he went away, saying, behold, I thought he would surely come out to me and stand and call upon the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the place and cure the leper. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned and he went away in rage. But his servants came near and said to him, my father, it is a great word the prophet has spoken to you. Will you not do it? Has he actually said to you, wash and be clean? So he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God. And his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. And he returned to the man of God, he and all his company, and came and stood before him. And he said, behold, I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. So accept now a present from your servant. But he said, as the Lord lives, before whom I stand, I will receive none. And he then urged him to take it, but he refused. Then Naaman said, if not, please let there be given to your servant 2 mule loads of earth. For from now on your servant will not offer burnt offering or sacrifice to any god but the Lord. In this matter may the Lord pardon your servant. When my master goes into the house of Rimmon to worship there, leaning on my arm, and I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, when I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, the Lord pardon your servant in this matter. And he said to him, go in peace. So, what do we do with this story? The background is Israel and Syria have been at war for a long time. And they're kind of in an uneasy peace right now. You can go back and read all the prefacing chapters to give you a little bit better idea. But this has been going on for a while. And, people prefer peace to war. But even in the midst of all of that, there was still a lot of raiding that was going on. Syria was a stronger power at that time. They would send people into Israel to fight, to gather spoil. And probably on one of these raids, this little servant girl that's mentioned in verse 3, was taken captive. It was probably not a real pleasant situation for her, right? Her parents may have been killed. But she has been kidnapped. And when it says a little girl, it's talking probably somewhere between 5 and 10 years old at this point. And so this little girl has been taken and is now the servant to the wife of the great general Naaman. Somebody asked me this morning, how do you say that? And I said, I don't know. I just say Naaman. It might be Naaman. It might be any one of a number of different pronunciations. But the fact is, this guy was, he was famous. Matter of fact, in Israel, he was infamous. You might want to compare him, if you're an Israelite, to someone today like Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping or Kim Jong-un. He would not be very popular in Israel because he's the one who had been harassing them and had defeated them. And it's just, not a good guy. And yet, here we've got a situation in the domestic situation at the home of Naaman and his wife, where a little girl has grown to love her mistress and has grown to care for her master. And she knows he's got leprosy. Now, what that leprosy is, we're not sure. The term could be used to cover anything from what we call leprosy today, which is Hansen's disease, all the way to some kind of nasty psoriasis. Undoubtedly, it was something a little more serious than psoriasis, but it was something which would keep someone from being able to be present in social situations. You would be kept away. In Israel, you would have to call out leper, and everybody would run away from you. So it's not a pleasant disease to have. So as you think about this, you think, here's this little girl, and she remembers something from before she was captive. She remembers that there was a prophet named Elisha. Elisha, unlike his predecessor Elijah, actually had a relationship with the kings of Israel. Elijah had nothing but contempt for them, because they were really bad. Now, I don't know whether they got better during Elisha's time or Elisha's approach to ministry was a little different, but he was well known throughout the country and thought well of. And so when Naaman persuades the king of Syria to send him to the king of Israel to get him cured, it's going to create a big stir, right? Now, to show you how important this guy was, it says in verse, here we go, 5, he takes 10 talents of silver and 6,000 shekels of gold. That's how valuable he was in the eyes of his master, the king of Syria. And I looked it up, I calculated how much that turns out to. 10 talents of silver works out to about $171,000, but 6,000 shekels of gold is like 3.4 million. So this is significant medical payment. Well, what's the king of Israel do? I can't cure him. And herein it's ironic because a little 5 to 10-year-old girl in Syria has more faith in the God of Israel and his prophet than the king, who consults with him on a fairly regular basis. The king of Israel doesn't even think about calling Elisha in, but Elisha hears. And Elisha, he comes or he doesn't come, he just says, send him to me. So, we get this picture. This entourage that Naaman is with is not small, I'm sure. He's in his chariot. Maybe he's got a bunch of other chariots with him. This is an important man. And he's got servants, he's got spears, he's got, anything and everything you can imagine. They pull up in front of Elisha's house. Now, Elisha was not a wealthy man. He probably lived in a small hovel. And Naaman's expecting him to come out and, wave his arms and say a big, long prayer and lay hands on him and you're healed. Elisha doesn't even come out. Elisha sends a messenger out and he says, go take a bath. Not exactly what was being expected. I mean, it's paying $3.5, $4 million for this visit, and that's what you do. And he gets really angry and he storms off. But then another insignificant thing happens. Some of his servants come to him and say, my master, and the ESV doesn't translate this as well as the NIV does. I want to read what it says in the NIV. So Naaman's servants went to him and said, my father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then when he tells you, wash and be cleansed? Now, that was a dangerous thing to do. Remember, he's a big guy. He's very important. He's very powerful. To contradict him and to, when he's angry especially, to go to him and say, let's calm down and see what we can do about this. But they do it. For them, it was a bigger thing. Maybe it was more significant than I thought about initially for them. But again, here we have servants who are nobodies coming to a somebody who is it's a dangerous situation for them. But they persuade him to do it. And so he goes down to the Jordan. Now, I've been to the Jordan River, and when he says the Jordan's dirty, absolutely right. It is a dirty place. When you get in the Jordan River, when you come out, you feel like, I should probably get a shower when I get done. Why God told Elisha to send him to the Jordan, who knows? I mean, it could have been something related to the fact that Israel passed through the Jordan on their way to the promised land to receive the blessing of God. Maybe it was a message to the king of Israel as much as to the king of Syria and to Naaman. We don't know the specifics. We don't get an explanation here. But the simple fact of the matter is, finally, Naaman does it. He goes down and he dips himself 7 times, and when he comes up, he's completely healed. That's a pretty incredible story. What's the impact? What's the result of this having taken place? Well, first of all, a life is saved. All right? Naaman, if it had been the really serious version of leprosy that he had, he could have lost his limbs. He could have died a very painful death. But his life is saved. And so the insignificant comment of a little slave girl, would that my master could see the prophet who is in Samaria, gets the ball rolling. And then when he gets ready to leave and is angry, it's the insignificant statement of his servants who come to him and say, my father, if he told you to do something great, wouldn't you have done that? Well, this is simple. Give it a try, for goodness sake. And he did. And so a life is saved. But a witness is shown as well, because Naaman is in the process of being changed. If you go back and you read through, again, the ESV, it says down in verse 15, you can find it here. Here we go. Then he returned to the man of God, he and all his company, and stood before him. He said, behold, I know there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. Whoa, that's a pretty significant witness, right? What God has done through this miracle performed at not even at the hands of his prophet, at the words of his prophet, his spiritual worldview has been completely changed at that point. God has used this to, in a sense, bring him to Jesus. It's a come to Jesus moment where he realizes that the one true God is the one who can do something like this, especially in a dirty river, right? And so, but it goes even further. Not only is the witness shown in that, but he knows that his own life has begun to change. Because now, instead of being the mighty Naaman, he calls himself your servant. He calls Elisha, I am your servant. And he makes a request, which is a rather interesting and unusual request, which, we're not completely sure exactly what all it means, but probably in asking for 2 mule loads worth of dirt, the paradigm that they believed in terms of religion in those days was that a god was only a god over a certain geographical area. And the only way you could worship that god would be on his soil. And so Naaman now has become a true believer, but his belief is a little on the warp side, right? So for him to worship, he has to have Israel to worship. So he wants 2 mule loads worth of dirt. Now, if it had been me, I'd have clarified things. If I was Elisha, I'd say, Naaman, really, God is the God of all the earth, and you don't have to have Israeli soil to worship on. Just go in peace. Well, he got the last part of it right. Elijah says, go in peace. Evidently, Elisha didn't think that at that point in time, a theology lesson was what was most important to Naaman. The most important thing was that he now worshiped the one true God. Now, what happened after that? We don't know. I mean, you can say, well, Naaman now has had a change of heart. He's no longer going to go out to war against Israel. We don't know that. He was an oppressor. And he's been healed, so he could oppress again. We don't know. Hopefully he didn't, but we don't. The little slave girl, she's still a slave. I doubt very seriously he went home and immediately freed her. Adopted her, made her his daughter, maybe. I mean, that would be nice to think about. And, if you want to put together a Christian novel that says that, you probably get a pretty good bestseller on your hand. But the fact is, we don't know that. And she may have lived the rest of her life apart from family, apart from her own religion, but we don't know. History has changed, though, and we are changed because of the insignificant words of a little slave girl. Would that my master could see the prophet that's in Samaria. And a couple of other servants that says, my father, if he'd asked you to do something great, wouldn't you have done that? Insignificant words that have a huge impact. Insignificant words that are causing us to consider this passage again this morning. Now, two things stand out to me about this passage. First is, and they're very similar, and they overlap significantly. First is, there are no such things as insignificant people. Right? C.S. Lewis, I brought a quote from him from The Weight of Glory. He talks about people in general. Okay? He says, remember that the dullest and most uninteresting person you talk to may one day be a creature which, if you saw it now, you would be strongly tempted to worship, or else a horror and a corruption such as you meet now, as if at all, only in a nightmare. Because everybody is going one way or another. Ultimately, we will either be like Christ or we'll be eternally separated from him. And everybody we meet, great or small, rich or poor, one day we'll fall into one of those two categories. And Lewis goes on and says, all day long we are in some degree helping each other to one or other of these destinations. There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. Nations, cultures, arts, civilizations, these are mortal. Their life is to ours as the life of a gnat. But it is immortals with whom we joke, with whom we work, marry, snub, exploit, immortal horrors or everlasting splendors. There are no insignificant people. Little slave girl, servants to great generals, they're significant. And God uses great people. But the other thing is there's no insignificant acts. Oh, I forgot one other quote. I wanted to make sure I got in here. 1 Corinthians 1:26-28. Let me talk about insignificance. Consider your calling, brethren, that there were not many wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble. God has chosen the foolish things of the world to shame the wise, and has chosen the weak things of the world to shame the things that are strong, and the base things of the world and the despised. God has chosen the things that are not, that he might nullify the things that are. And so, those of us who are here together today, we may consider ourselves insignificant. We may not think, oh, I'm really a nobody. But God specializes in taking people from the ash heap and raising them to the throne. God specializes in taking insignificant people and using them in such a way that as the master artist, as the one who is painting the broad pictures of eternity, uses every single stroke to bring out the beauty of what he's doing. Every single one of us is important to what God is doing. And so we should never look down on ourselves. We should never think someone else is greater than I am. They may accomplish more from a worldly perspective, but from God's perspective, it's the insignificant things that he takes and makes huge and beautiful in his economy. The second thing is that there are no insignificant acts. Again, the statement of the little slave girl, oh, that my master would see the prophet that is in Samaria. You know, what did it take for her to do that? Nothing. I mean, she had some experience. She witnessed to what she knew. And in a sense, isn't that what Christ calls us to when he says, you shall be my witnesses? He's not telling us that we have to be master theologians and world-famous evangelists in order to accomplish his purposes. He's calling us as believers to share the reality of what we know in terms of our relationships with God. When we begin to do that, when we start talking about what we've seen Jesus do in our lives, whether it's past in terms of our testimony or whether it's present, something we've seen God do yesterday, God takes that and begins to use it. It's not an insignificant thing. And it's important that we recognize that when we set foot outside the door of our house, we are entering our personal mission fields. Now, I'm a professor of missions, and I know that there are technical definitions that I'm overlooking here. I mean, technically, outside our door is not the mission field. And yet, for us, it is. It's the place where God has placed us to bear witness to his glory. And so, how should we approach that? What should we do with that in mind? Well, I made a list of 12 things here, which I'm going to run through quickly. I will not keep you too long. But things that I think about on a regular basis as I wake in the morning and I begin my day, things that I think that are valuable for all people. And the first is start your day with prayer. Before you even get out of bed in the morning, ask God to fill you with his Spirit and to empower you to see what he is doing that day so that whatever insignificant thing you may have on your schedule becomes significant in his economy. If we would begin with that, we might be amazed at what God would begin to do, just starting out that way. Ask yourself, anytime you happen to be someplace, why am I here? You never know. I know a guy recently that he was on his way to the store to get something, and he ended up going to the wrong store. It wasn't, that's a long story. I'm not going to go into his story that much. I'm going to tell you the brevity of this. But he went to a store that he wasn't expecting to go to. He had to pick up one thing. He ended up getting a cart full. And so instead of, like he usually did, going through the checkout yourself line, he got in line, the shortest line, the one that looked like it would go the quickest, where they would scan the stuff for him. And of course, like most of us, this guy ran into the problem. It was not the fastest. There was a problem. The person in front of him had an issue. Wasn't sure what it was. So he started flirting around with two little girls that were in the cart getting very unruly because their grandma was not being able to, actually what happened was she wasn't able to use her link card. And she had all these groceries that had been scanned and it wouldn't work. And so he's been keeping the kids calm, and that was a good thing. But the Lord impressed upon him, said, pay for her order. And he said, okay. I don't think he heard an audible voice, but he did. And what came of that? I mean, he doesn't know. He said, this is a gift from Jesus. There was a cashier who saw that, and there was the woman who was trying to pay for groceries that she couldn't afford otherwise. And don't know, it was insignificant. But it was something that God is going to use. It was something that he wasn't supposed to be in that store. He wouldn't have been in that line. And yet, look what God did. And what will God do? We won't know till we get to heaven someday. We may find out. Make time in your schedule. Don't pack your schedule so full that you don't have time to be used of God when things come along. I had a bad day back in this goes back a ways, 1985, and I've had bad days since, but I had an especially bad day. that day, I lived behind our church in Los Angeles, and I had a very busy day planned. And keep in mind, this is before cell phones and before being able to contact people, and I had an appointment scheduled back at UCLA where I was working. And I also had a deadline because Christmas was coming, and it was the last day I could get my packages in the mail to send them back to Illinois so they would be there before Christmas. So my schedule was perfect. So I'm going to run to the post office first thing, early because the line won't be up yet, and I will get in, get out, get to campus, have my appointments. And as I'm walking out the door, the janitor of the church sees me and goes, "Oh, hey, Mike, I told Mrs. Terry you'd take her to the laundromat this morning." What? Now, Mrs. Terry was an 85-year-old woman that lived next door to me in church-owned property, and she was a sweet old lady. She could hardly move. She was so slow, and she had a little dog named Pierre that was a toy poodle, and it just shook all the time. And she had to go to the laundromat. She needed to get laundry done. I said, "Lloyd, can't you do it?" He says, "No, I'm too busy today." So I really liked Mrs. Terry. Her little dog Pierre, not so much, but Mrs. Terry, she was a sweet lady. So I said, okay. So I went over and I helped her. I got her laundry in the car, and you know, she moves real slow getting to the car. And so by the time I get her to the laundromat and get her in and she gets her laundry started, I'm late to the post office. The line is out the door at the post office. So I'm standing there in line looking at my watch, missed my first appointment. And the line goes down very slowly. And so as I'm standing there in line, this old guy, I'm sorry I'm picking on old people this morning. I fall into this category too. But he came in with a World War II military hat on, you know. And he starts walking up and down the line, talking to people, just complaining so much about how President Roosevelt was operating the war in the South Pacific. And, you know, he no longer could think very clearly. He was living in 1945 or 44. And people were getting very uncomfortable and very annoyed. And finally, a postal clerk came out and grabbed him by the scruff of the coat and was going to throw him out. I said, "Oh, don't do that." So I went up and I started talking to him. I'm a history buff. I love World War II history. And so I started talking to him like it was 1944 or whatever it was. And I put my arm around his shoulder and I started moving him towards the door, and we talked and got outside, and I evidently made him happy enough that he walked on down the street to find someone else that he could talk to. And I got back in, I'd missed my second appointment. And but fortunately the line had gone down, and fortunately they hadn't stolen my packages. And so this went on for the day. I missed almost every appointment that day that I had, and I got home that night. I was so frustrated. And as I'm laying there in bed and I'm praying, I said, "Lord, this was an absolutely miserable day today." I said, I didn't get anything done I wanted to get done. And I don't hear God speak to me on a regular basis, but I heard him say something that night. He said, "You got everything done that I wanted you to do." So evidently, God thought that insignificant act of taking Mrs. Terry to the laundromat and helping this old man have a dignified exit from the post office, and the other several things that I did that were more important than my discipleship meetings that I had and the guy that I was going to witness to that day. But those insignificant things are the things that God uses. And maybe when we get to heaven someday, we will find out that those things that we didn't think were important at all were the most important things that we did while we were on earth. So, smile is another thing you can do. An insignificant act. If you smile, people will oftentimes, I've had all kinds of experiences. Sometimes they look away from you. They must be getting ready to stab me or something. But you can lighten people's day. It's amazing how, you smile at someone, a lot of times they will not only smile back, but if you kind of, watch what happens afterwards, they walk a little lighter. Smiling is an insignificant act that God can use. Ask people questions. Don't just talk about yourself. Don't talk about things, but ask them about what their life is like. And when you're asking, ask if you can pray for them. It's amazing the opportunities God opens up when you listen and you are willing to pray. And don't just say, "I will pray for you." Pray for them then. In all the years I've been doing this, I've only had 2 people refuse me. I still can't figure either one of them out, but it's an insignificant thing. Give to people when you have the opportunity. Speak truth and love to people. Don't get angry with them, but if you have to, speak the truth. It may not lighten their day at that point, but it may change their lives if they think about what they hear. Don't gossip. Not a good idea. Proverbs is full of stuff about how gossip separates intimate friends and causes all kinds of problems, but it's insignificant. If you gossip, you might wind up with bad fruit. If you don't gossip, you might wind up with some really positive stuff. At the end of your day, debrief with God. Ultimately, this all boils down to just remember that Jesus wants you to be his witness. He will use you if you are willing. Charles Spurgeon, the Prince of Preachers in the late early 1900s, was probably one of the most famous preacher evangelists in the world at the time. I have his testimony here. I'm going to read it to you. It's brief, but I think it's important because it's another example of someone who does something insignificant. At least they probably thought it was, but it had a powerful impact. Spurgeon writes this. He says, "I sometimes think I might have been in darkness and despair until now had it not been for God's goodness in sending a snowstorm." He's out walking and there's a blizzard. He's 15 years old at this time. He said, "When I could go no further down the street, I turned down a court and came to a little primitive Methodist chapel. In that chapel, there might be a dozen or 15 people. The minister did not come that morning, snowed up, I suppose," he said. "A poor man, a shoemaker, a tailor, or something of that sort, went up into the pulpit to preach. He was obliged to stick to his text for the simple reason he had nothing else to say. The text was Isaiah 45:22. "Look unto me, and be ye saved, all the ends of the earth." He did not even pronounce the words rightly, but that did not matter. There was, I thought, a glimpse of hope for me in that text. He began, "Dear friends, this is a very simple text indeed. It says, 'Look.'" Obviously. Now, that does not take a great deal of effort. It ain't lifting your foot or your finger, it's just look. Well, a man need not go to college to learn to look. You may be the biggest fool, and yet you can look. A man may not be worth $1,000 a year, £1,000, of the income, but anyone can look. A child can look. But what this text says is look. Then it says, "Look unto me." "Aye," he said in a broad Essex accent, "many of ye are looking to yourselves. No use looking there. You'll never find comfort in yourselves." Then the good man followed up his text in this way. "Look unto me. I am sweating great drops of blood. Look unto me. I am hanging on the cross. Look, I am dead and buried. Look, I rise again. Look unto me. I ascend. I am sitting at the Father's right hand. Oh, look to me." When he got to that length and managed to spin out 10 minutes, he was at the end of his tether. Then he looked at me under the gallery, I dare say with so few present, he knew me to be a stranger, and then said, "Young man, you look miserable." There was a blizzard, right? Well, I did, but I had not been accustomed to have such marks made on my personal appearance from the pulpit before. However, it was a good blow he struck. He continued, "And you will always be miserable in life and miserable in death, if you do not obey my text. But if you obey now, this moment, you will be saved." And then he shouted, as only a primitive Methodist can, "Young man, look to Jesus Christ." That's how Charles Spurgeon became a Christian. 10-minute message by a poor guy who had one Bible text and was not a preacher, although after I read this, I thought, that wasn't really a bad sermon. But that's what brought Spurgeon to faith. And who knows what things we say that could be used by God to touch the next Charles Spurgeon, or to touch the next little slave girl that will touch the next Naaman. Oh, that my master would see the prophet that is in Samaria. Well, I've gone long enough. Couple, just last things. Daryl, I am going to mention your sermon. If we are offering what we have, we will see the results of what Daryl preached about the first week. We will see that the books get balanced, that God will take the little things that we do, and those little things, I'm going to use a balance instead of a book here. Balance, you have, two sides, you put a weight on one side like that. But you can have tons of big, heavy, phenomenal people doing stuff. God takes one of those little, tiny, insignificant things, and it balances. God is sovereign. God will balance those books. Second of all, we can all be heroes. And we are called by God, maybe not to be a hero, but definitely to be a witness. And he can and he will use us if we are willing to offer ourselves to him. And your righteousness will be felt. Did I get the 3 points right? And if you follow this, the little insignificant thing that you may do will continue to reproduce itself in ways that you will never see or know. I go back to Farmer Fleming and Lord Randolph. Remember? Saved a kid from drowning. Kid got educated. Well, it turns out that Farmer Fleming has a son who was 10 years old at the time. His name is Alexander Fleming. Alexander Fleming is the guy who eventually invents penicillin. Whoa, that was a pretty good investment for a rich man in an education, right? But it ended up saving Lord Randolph's son a second time because Lord Randolph's name was Lord Randolph Churchill, and the little boy that Farmer Fleming saved was Winston Churchill. And Winston got a bad infection during World War II and would have died had it not been for Farmer Fleming's son who invented penicillin, who was able to get a dose of that, and it saved his life. God in his sovereignty continues to do great things through insignificant acts and insignificant people. If we are willing, he will use us in the same way. Do we have the last song?
Please stand as we close the service. Sing, I will glory in my Redeemer. I will glory in my Redeemer, whose priceless blood has ransomed me. Mine was the sin that drove the bitter nails and hung him on that judgment tree. I will glory in my Redeemer, who crushed the power of sin and death. My only Savior before the holy judge, the Lamb who is my righteousness, the Lamb who is my righteousness. I will glory in my Redeemer. My life he bought, my love he owns. I have no longings for another. I'm satisfied in him alone. I will glory in my Redeemer, his faithfulness, my standing place. Though foes are mighty and rush upon me, my feet are firm, held by his grace. My feet are firm, held by his grace. I will glory in my Redeemer, who carries me on eagle's wings. He crowns my life with loving kindness. His triumph song I'll ever sing. I will glory in my Redeemer, who waits for me at gates of gold. And when he calls me, it will be paradise. His face forever to behold. His face forever to behold.
Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all that we can ask or think, according to his power at work within us, to him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus forever and ever. Amen.